Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Workplace Safety North Feature Brain Lunch and Learn webinar, supporting the mental health of remote and rotational workers. My name is Gabby Lemon, and I'm the event specialist here at Workplace Safety North. We appreciate your attendance here today and want to mention a few housekeeping items before we get started. Your microphones have been muted, and we ask that you use the Q&A at the bottom of your screen for speaker questions. If you have any technical issues using the Zoom application, do let us know in the chat box and we'll do our best to help you. So to clarify, please put any commentary in the chat box and speaker questions in the Q&A section. Resource information and a recording of the webinar will be sent to you within 1 to 2 business days. Now I'd like to pass things over to host Elisha Malette, Health and Safety Specialist, Canadian Registered Safety Professional, and Certified Psychological Health and Safety Advisor at Workplace Safety North. Welcome, Elisha.
Thank you, Gabby, and welcome to everybody on the webinar today. So great that you were able to make the time to join us. I would like to take a minute of your time just to tell you a little bit about Workplace Safety North. We are a proud partner in Ontario's occupational health and safety system, and every day our team works towards our corporate vision of every worker home safe and healthy. We work to support employers and workers within the natural resource industry. Through partnerships and collaboration, we anticipate and respond to the health and safety issues affecting their people, their workplace, and their industry. As a health and safety specialist, I get to live and breathe health and safety and draw on Workplace Safety North's 4 core values, which are compassion, integrity, respect, and teamwork. These values shape how we do the work we do. And our Feed Your Brain events that were created and shaped by Angel Poitras, Angel who recently retired, but did design these sessions purposely to support the people in the workplace and provide a platform for conversations related to emerging issues. And that is exactly what we hope to achieve today. I would now like to introduce you to the topic for today. And while I do that, Gabby's going to open up a poll on your screen. So as that poll opens, go ahead and respond to that. The topic for today was inspired by the experiences of our team working in remote workplaces, responding to the priorities of the mining and forestry sectors, as well as recent risk assessments and root cause analyses for our sectors. These activities are building a better understanding of the psychological risk factors that are impacting these workplaces and the rotational workers within them. I would like to clarify before we begin that when we say remote, we are not referring to the recent hybrid or work from home arrangements. We mean the remote worker that requires a fly in, fly out, a bus in, bus out, or a long drive in and out. So I'm not sure if the poll is ready yet, Gabby, but I am interested to sort of see where we stand with some of these particular responses.
We have a few more responses coming in, but I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. So anyone who hasn't answered, please go ahead and hit submit. All right.
Okay. So it's interesting just to get an understanding of how long people have worked in a remote or rotational work type of arrangement. And I can see that there's quite a split between, and I find that's an interesting thing to consider because those that have been working for 10 plus years or 5 to 10 years, it really does mean that you probably have some good gifts to support others as far as the knowledge and experience to make that type of work arrangement a positive one for you and your family. So thank you for that. I will leave the second poll really for our first speakers for today. I think it's going to really highlight their content. So I'm going to leave that aside for now and make sure I take the time to introduce you properly. So we have 3 guest speakers in total today, and I would like to start out by introducing 2 of them. So we have Priya Maloney and Mario Kozovic. They both bring over 15 years of experience working in the health and wellness industry. Priya holds a master's in business administration and a master's of physiotherapy, and she's going to share her experience developing and implementing health programs in remote locations. Mario brings a diverse background to mining wellness space with the focus on injury prevention, ergonomics, and on-site wellness services. Together, they run MindWell, which is an on-site health and wellness company focused on delivering solutions to the industrial sector. These solutions include everything from the delivery of medical, paramedical, disability case management, and more. The programs aim to deliver a strong return on investment, reduce turnover, and boost the health and wellness culture of the site. All programs are individualized to respective sites and as such have tailored approaches in environments that have limited access to services. And I would just like to give a special welcome to you both.
So thank you, Elisha, for introducing us and giving a great description of ourselves, but also our company, Mindwell. This topic is extremely important to us as we do implement a lot of programs at remote sites. And we do really hear from the workforce some of the struggles and the challenges that they are facing. And that's even outside of the typical, aches and pains and injuries. It's things along the lines of trouble sleeping. It's anxieties about being off work or on modified duties. It's general anxieties from home and financial situations as well. So I found it really interesting, and thank you everyone for participating in the poll, that there were a lot of individuals that chose all of the above. And I think that that's really real in understanding that there's not a one-stop solution. You can't just flick on a switch and we're going to be dealing and supporting the mental health of our workforce. Understanding that it's a multifaceted situation and challenge that we're facing also lets us understand that the solution needs to be multifaceted as well. So we're really excited to be here. It's a topic that's near and dear to our hearts, and it's something that we're definitely hearing a lot of. The traditional model of taking care of our workforce. Some of you may resonate with some of these phrases, but, the suck it up buttercup, or, this is just the cost of doing business. Dealing with injuries is the cost of doing business. Dealing with someone being off work, or just work through it. I'm just going to work through it. Some of you may have heard some of these phrases and feel like you can resonate with some of them, or might have said that to someone or to yourself. So working in health and wellness, when we think about taking care of the mental health of our workforce, it goes beyond a benefits program or an EAP phone number that someone can call. It really goes beyond that piece in order to really kind of dissect what some of the great solutions are. So if we go to the next slide, I wanted to take a moment, and I do thank Elisha for kind of mentioning, the remote worker, because nowadays that means a lot of things. But in our context, we're looking at someone who's outside of their typical environment. They may be in an area that has decreased access to services, for example, paramedical services. It may be an area where it may be work where there's shift work required. So this may be someone who has disrupted patterns of sleep, because 1 week they may be a day shift, 2 weeks from then they might be night shift. This also affects eating. And as we know, the body is an entire system. So if our eating patterns are different, our sleep patterns are different, that definitely impacts the whole individual, from the physical, mental, and also another aspect that we look at is the social. So furthermore, we're looking at an individual that might be a bit isolated. So they might be away from their family, their support network, even examples where a family member at home might be sick. That adds an additional stressor to that individual that is away, or away for long periods during the day. We're also looking at away from personal activities. And at times we think, oh, well, that's not that important. But things like going to the gym or participating in sports or missing special occasions, birthdays, Halloween, for example. These are all things, again, that compound, that make up this type of a workforce. And finally, a lot of individuals that are going through this type of remote and rotational work may have physically demanding jobs. So that adds an additional component that we do feel has an impact on the workforce. One reason I wanted to have this slide as well is really just to understand that we're looking at an individual from lots of aspects. We're looking holistically from the physical, mental, as well as the social side. I wanted to throw an example out there so that we could almost imagine a person that's going through some sort of challenge. I'll give an example that we typically hear pretty often is that, someone will say, I was reaching down, picking up something, and I tweaked my back. So they tweak their back, they're in discomfort, they're in pain. Maybe they don't get access to certain services right away. Maybe they just see how it goes and they continue working. That, small pain can turn into something that's frequent, consistent, chronic. All of a sudden, the person's not sleeping well. All of a sudden, they can't perform their job duties the same way. They go on modified duties. So now they've been taken away from the department they're used to working or the job role that they're used to working in and modified to a new role. All of a sudden, this is starting to affect as well their mental health in the sense of, well, I don't have that social support. I'm not able to do my job properly. I'm not able to pick up my kids. I'm not able to play my sports. So now all of a sudden, this one tweak of a low back has escalated and turned into something a lot more. And it becomes almost like this vicious cycle that we do believe can be preventable. So Mario's going to go into a lot of the solutions a little bit later on, but I almost wanted to paint this picture that we almost can't look at it from one lens. We need to look at it from this holistic lens, looking at the entire individual and the entire person. So if we go to the next slide, I wanted to mention that we wanted to keep this portion of the presentation very informal. We want you to ask questions. We want to bring up a few topics, but very happy to have discussions about them as we go. We will leave time for questions as well at the end, but please feel free to use the chat feature. As we want to give an idea of solutions, but we also feel that it is a conversation and that we want to set the stage for this shift. And where we feel that really lies in creating a wellness culture. So here I have, the importance of a wellness culture. And again, we come back to that light switch. We don't just flick that switch on and wellness is presented throughout our organization. A lot of us know that, this is a process. It takes time. It takes time to have an authentic wellness program. And what I mean by that is if all of a sudden you walk into the morning huddle and you're sitting in front of, 20 mechanics and you're saying, everyone, we need to start talking about mental health. Does anyone want to start? Give me an example of something they're dealing with. I mean, a lot of the workforce might be taken back by that and say, well, we've never talked about this before. All of a sudden, you're asking me to share my experience of what I'm dealing with. It's very hard and it doesn't have that trust built in. So, developing a wellness program or a wellness culture at an organization, it does take time, but there are little wins and steps that you can take along the way in order to have a really strong wellness culture at an organization. Wellness to me, again, means multiple things. It's the promotion of health. And that includes eating, sleeping, looking at addiction, physical activity. All these aspects kind of join forces in order to create that wellness culture that is authentic. So, as we all know, and when we think about it, there's several studies that have been out there saying that employee well-being as well as a program directly benefit an organization. Fewer sick days, higher performance, productivity metrics, lower rates of burnout and turnover, and ultimately the bottom line. We're all here because we care about the workforce. We want our workforce to feel good mentally, physically, socially. We're here for the workforce. But we also see that if you're able to impact the workforce, you're able to impact meaningful metrics as well. So that you're creating added value for the workforce. And by doing that, you're doing an added value for your company and your productivity as well. So I wanted to mention that because I know that everybody does care about those pieces as well. If we go to the next slide, where do we start? And I think that, our experience with starting programs on site, especially in remote areas, is that, it is sort of trendy right now to say, well, COVID brought on a lot of mental health issues that we need to deal with. We need solutions. What do we do? What we've noticed from the first step is that at a lot of organizations, there's not really an organizational structure where health and wellness is part of the processes. There's not really a department or an individual whose role or responsibility is health and wellness, talking about mental health, talking about sleep, talking about nutrition. And that becomes challenging, especially when you want to talk about what services need to be done, who's going to spearhead these projects, who's going to, which departments are involved with ensuring that things are done and that things continue to be done, which again, that's something that we've seen in practice, is that it's great to be able to have an initiative where wellness is brought to the forefront, but is that going to continue? Is that going to become ingrained in the culture of the organization? And that really happens over time, but it also happens with the push from management and supervisors, and being able to feel that it's something that the whole organization cares about. It's not only just for the workers that are, going underground every day or working on in the vehicles. It's also about the supervisors. It's also about the management. It's also about the general manager, all playing a role in having the wellness be part of the conversation. So where we've seen some of the challenges is, and again, I'll give an example, an early morning huddle where the workforce is all stretching and getting ready for the day, and the supervisor at the front is not stretching with them. Again, it feels like a very small thing, but over time, if there isn't that engagement piece, if there isn't that top-down approach taken into consideration, then you might have the stretches that go on for a day or two, or maybe a week, but you want to have that continuity. You want to have that longevity of programs as well. So we just find that, figuring out and formalizing an actual structure to your health and wellness programs, services, allows for more longevity. It also allows for, budgets to be allocated, space to be made for these types of activities. One thing that's come about is, sometimes in remote work, it's not an inviting space to talk about something going on, or maybe a struggle that's happening at home. A lot of the times, occupational health nurses become, they wear multiple hats because they have to deal with not just, their regular day-to-day jobs, but also a lot of the workforce coming in and talking about financial situations, or talking about something going on with a family member at home. So I think that, again, being able to allocate roles and responsibilities across different departments allows for more continuity and longevity to a program. Leadership, again, is a huge piece. Having services available is one aspect, but having those conversations, reducing the stigma, really creating an open communication channel and platform, having access to facilities that make people feel like they can think about their health and wellness. A lot of us know, remote sites where you're at camps, you go into the bunkhouses, everyone's room looks the same. There's opportunities for making the workforce feel like they're a little bit more at home. So I think there's opportunities to have great solutions where you can have quick wins. And I think, again, it's just not enough to direct someone to a phone line that they can call. You need to have that conversation. You need to be able to give really great and tangible solutions. And that kind of leads us into the next portion, where Mario is going to go a little bit more detail into some of the solutions and some of the outcomes as well.
Thank you, Priya, for that. All right, so let me just get in here. And again, thank you everybody for attending. And I think it's very important that we keep this informal a little bit. We are informal when we are at site, so we believe in it. We believe in tackling solutions in a bit of a non-traditional way, because that is the best way to kind of get engagement. And I will talk about that. I think during this talk that I'm going to be doing, if you have any specific questions, please feel free to ask, and then we'll answer them at the end of the talk as well. Okay, so proactive. I'm going to talk about solutions, and mainly I want to talk about proactive versus reactive, access to services and facilities, engagement, management, and leadership, which I think is huge, which is what Priya just kind of touched up on, and also taking that individualized approach and research data-driven systems. So following the data and being able to track the wellness program. I think the biggest thing that we're going to address here is that physical, from our side, physical affects mental, and that is a huge piece in terms of engagement. It's like Priya mentioned, it's tough to bring up a mental health question to a workforce, but it's easy for me to say, or an individual to say, well, how's your back feeling this morning? And that's an easy transition into talking about someone's body. Once we have addressed something that could be tangible and something that we can create small solutions, small wins to, and then the conversation of mental health can be opened up eventually when that trust is built. So we do believe in that model, and I'll definitely talk about how being preventative, proactive instead of reactive is a huge benefit as well. Okay, so in terms of what proactive and reactive culture, one of the key factors to having a successful integration of a wellness program is, with a focus on mental health solution, comes with implementing a preventative model to begin with, right from the get-go. We typically see at sites, there's a lot of emphasis on creating solutions to the mental and physical challenges based on specific incidences. And once those incidences have been brought to the forefront, then there's that reaction to say, okay, we need to create a solution now, because we've had a spike in mental health, or a spike in low back injuries, or a spike in diabetes or whatnot. So it is very important to be able to tackle some of these solutions right off the bat by being preventative. And again, we can share a little bit more about that. Again, the workforce and the rest of the management need to create a leadership together towards mental health solutions. And supervisors, we always say it comes from a top down. So having supervisors be able to be open to the conversation of mental health and physical health is something that comes from an educational standpoint. So no matter how long you've been at the site, how long you've been exposed to specific environments, especially during COVID, it is important that the supervising team or leadership and even management, upper management, such as even the GMs of the sites, are able to be comfortable to share those types of conversations, whether it be in safety meetings, whether it be at huddles, whether it be just informally being able to walk through a hallway and run into a colleague and be able to talk about how things have been from both physical and mental side. And I think that goes a long way. Prevention also goes back home, and whether it's a 7 and 7 or a 14 and 14, and we were talking about how it is important to have that mindset and not be out of rhythm once you're at home, because let's say we have specific programming at site or at camp, but once you go home, and if you're in a remote area, it is very difficult to maybe access some of those services or to have that continuum of care. You fall out of rhythm because the 2 weeks or the 1 week is quite a bit of time. So it is so important when there is wellness programming that there is things like takeaway for homework, or be in constant communication with the individuals that you are working with, and to be able to constantly work on the body and mind jointly for the rest of the year, which means that you might have some downtime when the winter months come. Things become a little bit tougher, and access to services might get tougher. But it's very important to throw in solutions that could have those little quick wins for a longer period of time. Workshops and huddles. We've talked a lot about this lately, and wellness just needs to be a part of it. The preventative model means that we're bringing up topics that not necessarily are brought to the forefront to begin with, but from our data we've got a spike in specific injuries, and those specific injuries can be very acute, which can lead to chronic pain, and then can lead to mental health challenges as well. Because, you know, if you're off work, if you are on short-term or long-term disability, it can be very, very debilitating to not have a proper plan in place. So, and I will talk about that when I address access to services, which is a topic that's been brought to the forefront for us in some of these remote areas. Workshops and huddles, one-on-one is very important. Having just time for having a one-on-one conversation with specific individuals from each department gives, even if it's 5 minutes, 3 to 5 minutes, to create a little bit of, I would say, personalized approach towards what might be happening and how that individual could benefit from joining specific meetings or workshops that could be beneficial to them is huge, because it goes a long way, and it ends up, you know, pulling in, we say, you know, 4% of the workforce. Once you get the 4% of the workforce on board, you can kind of tie in everybody else. And it takes time to tie in the individuals that are not so welcoming to change, or even welcoming to those conversations. You know, we will talk about that in access to facilities and how a gym setup can be a relation to that. So yeah, in terms of access to services at facilities at camp, we find that if the gym space or wellness space is not there to begin with, it's really difficult to have that time to dedicate for individuals that are having a tough time with access to service at their own towns or their own cities, wherever they live. So creating a space that's dedicated just for wellness or just for the social side of things is very important. And that could be just a room. It could be a room that, you know, has some paintings on them, or creates a little bit of a wellness feel to it, just to be able to create a little bit of, I would say, separation from the camp life, and whether it's fitness or social life itself. Mario,
I just wanted to bring out a question. So Lindsay had mentioned, can you provide us with an example of a quick win with getting the senior leadership teams on board for an initiative like this, where they don't see the connection value? I had a moment to think about this too. And I just, in response to that, I feel that there's, for example, in a morning huddle that might happen at 6 a.m. where you just have all the teams kind of cycling through. It's a great opportunity for the superintendent of health and safety, or HR, or even the general manager to come down and stretch with the workforce. It's just a quick example, or even just be around, walking around, to allow for the exchange or those informal interactions, even throughout the day, being present at the work site, which is, again, in our experience of what we see sometimes, is that it's so easy to have so many emails to get through and so many other things that need to be done on the computer, that a lot of the leadership or management tend to be more in their offices, especially during those moments, because there's these moments like huddles, for example, where there's opportunities to interact. There's not that many. So I think being available in those moments really allow for seeing that leadership presence, that physical presence. And something as easy as stretching is you see someone in a little bit of an uncomfortable situation where they might look a little funny because they're stretching out or they're doing something. Again, I think it just builds that connection with that workforce. And I think there's a lot of value for that.
Awesome. Thank you, Priya.
There's also another question I didn't have a chance to read. Do you have any statistics or outcomes that can support and drive management to want to implement some of these solutions? Also, where would you recommend a company start when it comes to creating these pieces of wellness culture? So regarding statistics or outcomes, I definitely think, you know, when looking at, so for example, looking at a claim. So Mario had talked about proactive versus reactive. It's always easier to start dealing with reactive things. because they're right in your face and they're there and they're costing the company money. So being able to actually take steps towards solutions to getting someone who's off work for whatever reason, whether it's a physical injury, whether it's a mental health issue, being able to actually take the time to focus on these types of initiatives versus, and again, this might not happen at every site, versus someone who's been off work, they're on short-term disability, they're now on long-term disability, they've sort of gotten lost in the process and the shuffle. Dealing with those types of injuries, you know, being able to reduce claims from 12 claims at the beginning of the year to 4 claims 8 months later. Those are all things that we've seen in practice at sites. And again, sometimes it's just about having someone focusing on those areas a little bit more, because again, a worker that goes from a small injury to a short-term disability or to a WSIB claim costs the company a lot. So that's one quick win that you can always look at statistics that really have a huge benefit very quickly as well. I know Mario's going to go more into that as we go. And where would you recommend a company start when it comes to creating pieces of a wellness culture? And again, I think it starts with, I think to me, it starts with dealing with the reactive piece a little bit, because there you do have quick wins. You're able to deal with things that are right in your face. And then at the same time, build that trust and then be able to implement some of these more prevention strategies at the same time. I don't know, Mario, if you have something to add.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think that's great questions. And I think part of that is the assessment piece. So getting an assessment of your site and getting an idea of what the current situation is from a wellness perspective, mental and physical, what access to services there are on site or around the surrounding towns, and what are the areas of need? Where can you fill in the gaps right off the bat? I think that's so important, a thorough assessment. And sometimes these thorough assessments of the site need to be done by a third-party company. And the reason for that is because there needs to be a bit of a second look, someone that has that, no interest within the company, but having management or anybody from health and safety or HR departments, sort of digging through some of the gaps. Sometimes there's a little bit of a drawback between workforce and saying, well, what are we looking for here? Or there's a fear of some sort of repercussions or whatnot. So I think it's important to have a third-party company and to be able to just assess and see where the needs are, and whether it's physical, mental, whether it's a social programming, and being able to kind of bridge all those things together and start slow and have those small wins. Because anything that we've learned is throwing down anything down someone's throats and be like, we must do this, or we mandate that you have to do these programs, or even a stretching program, as Priya was saying in the huddle. If you mandate something, most likely the individuals and workforce won't do it, and it has to come naturally or organically within it. And which brings me to my next topic of wellness within health and safety and HR. And I think that's a huge piece, and it's just something that we've been exploring a lot about, especially with onboarding, for example. So, from our experience, being able to work with onboarding and provide education and what services are available at camp and site for wellness is very important. And it sets the precedent and the standard right off the bat as that individual is hired. And I think that goes to show the values that are followed by that company. And it shows that in terms of tough and challenging times, there are options for those individuals right when they enter in the first week, which might be a disconnect regardless, because it's their first week or second week, and we don't know what the previous and more chronic issues the individuals were dealing with. So I think just having that as an option is huge. My next topic is to talk about individualized approach, and that is something that we say one size does not fit all. When we look to fill in the gaps for certain areas of need at different sites, it is important to prioritize and on the areas that are not just a current issue, but areas that you can support for every department and every individual. Having the right programming in place that gives easy access and solutions to those that are not the most proactive, I would say, and sometimes take a seat back and look for the proactive individual to take a shot at something first. That's when you need to reach out. You need to reach out to those individuals that are sort of in the hiding, and we need to make that a comfortable space and a comfortable program. And again, going back to superintendents, supervisors, everyone that joins and walks the grounds or within the camp, last thing we want is for that worker to be saying, well, I'm not going to bring that up to this health and safety individual or supervisor or superintendent because of fear of that, hey, I'm maybe this is something I should not be addressing, or something of fear of judgment. Again, there is that piece within all the sites, and we're trying to change that. And I think it's going to take a long time to change that. And Priya touched up on it earlier, suck it up, buttercup. And that sometimes it's something we hear all the time. And it's not the way it should be. And it should be with the new generations entering, especially mining and forestry. We want to make it comfortable that those conversations are something that can be brought up within management and leadership as well. Research and data-driven systems. So follow the research, follow the data. That is the key thing. It's basically saying, do you have a baseline? And a lot of companies don't have a baseline. They don't have a baseline of engagement on wellness, or even injury statistics that, per department or per, what are the mechanisms of injury? Why are these low back injuries happening more frequently here than in maybe other sites or in different departments? Everybody's job is strenuous. Even sitting right now, currently me sitting does not feel great. I don't love to sit. I'm a person that loves to move. So there's individuals in health and safety, in HR. There's people that are in the mills that are, standing for long periods of time doing stairs that has a huge effect on knees and hips. There's, open pit underground workers. There's forestry workers who are operating different kinds of vehicles. So again, taking an individualized approach is super important, because being able to say, hey, this department deals with these types of injuries that can be debilitating, that could be affecting mental health. And again, physical affecting mental. This is sort of a topic that we're trying to merge into. But, at the end of the day, it's getting that piece of assessment and knowing where the underlying issues, the root causes of issues are. That is sort of where you can get started with unraveling some of these issues. And from an individualized approach, the thorough assessment is from, again, from ergonomics as well. So from an ergonomic standpoint, not just having a PDA that been shelved for 3 years and there's dust on it and no one's open on that department, but also making it very accessible to recommendations and tying in the PDA to, let's say, a return to work FAF, and being able to say, hey, look, this is the collaboration between your job role, the way we're going to coach you through getting back to work, specifically on this job role. And that takes time. It takes time for the individual to be confident. There's a mental component to that, depending on the severity of injury. Again, being very individualized is so important. So not taking, everything as a whole and saying, well, yeah, you have a low back injury. Well, my low back injury might be way more severe than Priya's low back injury. And which I want to touch up on just quickly, because it's something that we've seen quite a bit, and it's something that needs to be addressed, that when you're lingering with a low back, neck specifically, neck or low back injury, anything through the spine, or even piriformis down towards the glutes, the butt area, there's specific nerves and there's specific, I'm getting a little detailed here, but there's specific areas that are very effective. They're going to affect your sleep, your lifestyle, the way you pick up your kids, the way you play with your colleagues, the way you do sports. It's going to affect everything. And if the right services, or if the right access to services is not in place, and even the right therapy isn't in place to make sure that the plan is put together to unravel this chronic pain that could be going on for years, it's so hard for that individual to continue to get back to full duties, or even to work productively without being in pain. So sometimes being able to dissect the severity of injuries is very important, and being able to take them very seriously. From a data perspective, I think we really want to share that data is key. It's something, seeing where your short and long-term disability is coming from. Why is it there? Dr. Michelle will touch up on this, but low back and mental health are probably one of the top reasons that, people are off work. So we those are areas that we need to follow. And it's just digging deep and seeing the real mechanisms of injury and making sure that your departments and the supervisors are aware of this. They're aware of the injuries that are coming from specific departments and why are they coming, whether it's a specific age group or whether it's a specific demographic. Maybe it's more experienced that individuals that are not getting as injured because they've been in the game for longer, but educating the new crews to be able to implement some of the things that we've learned over the years to just be safer and take that preventative approach for long term. I want to jump into program outcomes. I know we don't have a lot of time here and we want to save some time for Q&A. So again, workplace culture. So just the next slide. We'll jump into the next slide there. Let me just, there we go. So from outcomes, from value-added services, data-driven, again, it's wellness programming goes to show even issues currently with retention and recruitment, because we're noticing that specific social programs, wellness programs, even programs that are dedicated towards, financial side of things, nutrition, sleep, addiction, which Dr. Michelle will talk about. I think, again, there's so much to benefit from this in the long run. Some of the short-term wins could be sometimes lost because you expect things to happen quicker than they are, and change is very difficult in the industries that we're in. But we do believe that improving morale and engagement and will eventually 100% affect productivity. And that's just something that we've gotten from data, from our research, and from just being present at sites and knowing how individuals are working when they're not in pain or their headspace is where they need it to be. So from an investment standpoint, from a company, WSIB claims, being able to lower those, and it's not just the cost of doing business. We hear this all the time. Well, we have 15 WSIB claims this year. Well, it's just the cost of doing business, and that is something that needs to be tackled right away. And I know Elisha's probably prompting me now to jump off, but overall, what I want to say is that wellness goes a long way for the long term, and mental and physical health solutions can be tackled by small wins, small steps, and in an informal approach that gets the workforce on your side from leadership and management altogether. So thank you.
Thank you, Mario. My on-screen presence clearly helped you see the time and move on, but I do want to save time at the end so that we can pull in both Mario and Priya, and then Michelle's presentation, so that we can, really look at everything presented to the group today and carry that forward. So thank you, Mario and Priya. I think making that connection between the physical and the mental is such an important message. And I think you were able to do that for us today so far. So thank you for that. I do want to introduce you to our next speaker for today, which is Dr. Michel Larivière. Dr. Larivière is a clinical psychologist and professor at Laurentian University. For the last 25 years, Dr. Larivière has completed several large-scale studies on the health and well-being of workers in various occupations, from healthcare, corrections, human services, and first responders. And most recently, him and his team completed the mining mental health study. It was a 5-year effort and the largest of its kind in the literature, with over 2,200 subjects, and it measured several indicators of well-being, such as symptoms of depression, anxiety, stress, burnout, substance use, and various other health issues. The data from this research really will guide policymakers and industry leaders on how to best target interventions for workers and their families. And the research has created tools that can help assist occupational health specialists, case managers, and human resource professionals with post-injury or work or illness workplace reintroduction. Sorry for that. Dr. Larivière, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Elisha, and thanks for putting this together so impeccably. It's very planned very well. thanks to Paige and Gabby as well, and to my colleagues, Pri and Mario, whose success is growing and whose success is becoming more dear to me. Now, Elisha, is the technology working? Am I being heard okay?
Yes, you sound great, and your slides are up on the screen.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. I'm glad to see the technologies working. For instance, right now, you should all see a tall, fit, and young-looking man, a very attractive one. And if that is not the case, then there's something wrong with your camera or the software you're using. So talk to your boss about that. Since about the 1990s, as you mentioned, Elisha, I've been studying the well-being of workers. And I guess that's one of the more dreadful statistics I'm presenting today, is that many of my students now at the university actually weren't even around in the mid-1990s. But that's what I've devoted my research to. And being in Sudbury on the clinical side, I do see a lot of ill and injured workers here. So really, if in a nutshell, my research has been focused on how workplaces affect mental health and well-being, and how mental health and well-being affects workplaces. In the last 5 years, I've really focused on the mining industry and their workers, such that I'm happy to share a lot of that work with you today. By the end of this talk, number one, I'd like you to have a sense of the current state of well-being among mining workers. The second goal for my talk is to understand the drivers or the predictors of that well-being. And then finally, number three, I'd like you to have a good sense of the issues that maybe you can start prioritizing to help employees and your organizations and help them to thrive. So those will be my three goals for today. I'll start with the first slide, which will give you a bit of a snapshot of what the workforce might look like. And hopefully some of you are collecting this data already on your employees. But we have fairly large samples of workers now, and we would estimate that, they're about 43 years of age on average. It's largely still a male-dominated workforce at about 90%. That number will certainly change over the next several years. About 2/3 are college or university graduates. And on average, the typical mining worker will have about 17 years of mining experience. So it's a fairly experienced workforce. Next. As I mentioned, we're really interested in their mental health and their well-being. And one of the clearest indicators of that is depression. Depression is like almost the common cold in some ways of the family physician's practice. And by that, I say that that depression is not a small issue, quite the contrary. There's significant suffering involved here. I say common cold because it is so common. And so when we measured symptoms of depression in this workforce, only about 53% would be classified as being in the normal range of depressive symptomatology. Almost 20% were in that mild range of depressive symptoms. And then you can see the breakdown of what's left. What you have is at least a mildly to moderately depressed workforce, those people that you are caring for. Let's take a look at anxiety, which on the next slide shows you that it seems to be reported far less frequently. In fact, much lower than I would have anticipated, where 90% of our samples are in the low category. Now, that could be just sometimes people may not recognize anxiety when it is present. So we might need some additional research on that. Let's keep going. Now, one really good indicator of health in general and mental health in particular is sleep. And so in some of our work, we've used some psychometrically valid instrumentation or questionnaires to explore that issue. When you ask large samples of mining workers about their sleep, about half of them will say it's fairly good. Only about 12% will say it's very good. For the rest of them, they will typically say that it's either very bad and more often fairly bad. So hopefully now you can see the implications of these numbers already in terms of fatigue, which I'll talk to you about shortly. About 80% of workers in this industry right now are reporting elevated levels of fatigue. And that's extraordinarily high. Only about 20% would say, well, I'm fatigued, but probably no more than the next person or the average person. It's probably a healthy level of fatigue, if there is such a thing. But when 80% of a workforce says they are tired or very tired, then there are consequences to that. Let's keep going. One of the possible consequences, of course, is burnout. And burnout is something that you can measure. It's not a diagnosis, so we don't diagnose people with burnout. But we can measure this thing called burnout, and usually it's couched in terms of fatigue, in a sense of a lack of productivity, of cynicism, and about 70% of the typical mining workforce will say, well, it's not really a concern, but about 30% will produce a score where they would be screened positively for burnout. There is a sex difference here. As you'll notice on the left, that among women, that score, the higher scores are more frequent than among males at 26%. We could spend hours discussing why that is the case, but we're going to keep going for the sake of time here and talk about things that act as barriers or facilitators when people return to work. So RTW means return to work. And that's been a really, really big part of my research, is trying to understand who is going to return to work and in how long. I'll come back to that later, but I want you to notice some of these facilitators and barriers. When you ask people who are off work and who have now returned, and then you ask them, what helped you get back? What they will likely tell you first is that they had good healthcare services or medical support. They will say that that treatment was timely, that was appropriate. In other words, it coincided or matched their needs, that the employer was able to find meaningful modified work. And then I want you to take a look at how often you will now see the word support. Support from a supervisor, support from coworkers, support from your treatment providers, even support for friends, from friends, are things that really, really help people get back to their jobs. And so that's important in terms of, what, and hopefully your brains are already starting to churn now on, okay, if that's the case, how do I facilitate, I guess, the facilitators? Let's keep going. Now, I didn't mention yet, there's not a lot of research on mining industry workers. It's frankly a bit rare, and I think that's why a number of companies have approached me to say, we need to understand this better in our industry. It's because there's not a whole lot. There is some stuff coming out of Australia, and in one of the, I think, documents that Elisha may have circulated, you will get some of that research from down under. Their workforce in some of the studies would indicate that 85% of their workforce is male. maybe a little bit younger at 38. And education levels are actually different in some of the research I've read, and where about 21% are post-secondary graduates versus, say, in Ontario, where it's probably closer to 60%. The implications of that, I'm not entirely sure about just yet. And that will take more research. Okay, so let's keep going on the snapshot of these workers. Let's agree that there's about 41% that are suffering from mild to extreme symptoms of depression. About 6% are suffering from moderate to concerning symptoms of anxiety. And I haven't talked about this yet, but I think it's relevant, that about 11% should or screened positive for PTSD. Now, here's what that means. PTSD, we all know the diagnosis because we talk about it a lot these days. There are some tests that we can give people to see if we should maybe investigate further to understand if in fact they are diagnosable for PTSD. Among mining industry workers that we've studied, it's about 1 in 10. Now, that's not as high as first responders, paramedics and firefighters and police, or people working in the military. But it is significantly higher than the general population, and I think that's worth understanding a bit better. Let's keep going. We did measure suicidal ideations in this population. Some research in the general population of Canadians, if you were to ask 100 people from the general population of Canada and you said, have you ever thought of killing yourself in the last 2 weeks, or at least maybe not planned and made plans to do it, but at least have it cross your mind? If you ask that question to Canadians, about 2.7% would say, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't do it, but it did cross my mind. And if you compare that to the mining sector here, it is 10.6% in the research that we've done. 1 out of 10 of your potential workforce, and I know every company is probably very different, but on a very, very large scale, there's at least some indications that 1 out of 10 have had thoughts of suicide but would not carry them out. Now, what that looks like in a clinical setting, so at my private practice, what I might hear from someone is when we're screening for suicidality is they might say, well, sometimes when I drive home after a long shift and I'm feeling down, I actually do look at that rock cut or the other lane that I'm driving against, and it does cross my mind. Next slide. Now, all these things are interrelated. The fatigue, the poor sleep, the symptoms of depression and anxiety. So we're starting to get a bit of a snapshot here. But first, is there something in the chat, Elisha, I should take a look at here?
No, I think I was just commenting. It actually comes from me, just the fact that the statistics you're sharing, as well as the slide you had on the facilitators and barriers related to return to work, just they speak volumes. So I appreciate the research and all of everything you're sharing today.
Well, thanks, Elisha. We can measure burnout, as I've mentioned before, and we said that almost a third would screen positively for that construct. And why? I mean, the why is a very good question to ask. We obviously, I think we have some potential answers here. About 50% of workers are on 12-hour shifts or more. And workers in general, in our large surveys are telling us that they might get 6 hours of sleep. If they're doing night shifts, that's about 5.5 hours per sleep So by any healthy standard, that's pretty low. And maybe we shouldn't be surprised that people are reporting fatigue. Now, I know this is a collective agreement kind of issue. It's still the case that when you ask people in different professions, what kind of shift would you like the best? Often the answer I get is, you know, the more hours and the more time away from this place, the better. So the more hours on a shift, they actually prefer 12 or more hours, is what I'm hearing quite often, at least anecdotally, because they like being away from the workplace for as much as they can. Now, I know collective agreements aren't necessarily made with health in mind, uniquely, but I think they should be. And on this issue of sleep and fatigue, I think that should be at the negotiation table. Let's keep going. Again, our work has allowed us to move from anecdotes to actual numbers. About a quarter of people responding to some of our work are saying that they engage in binge drinking. And that seems to be quite highly correlated with high levels of work-related stress. And maybe that doesn't surprise you. What people don't necessarily think about, though, is alcohol being quite a significant depressant. And if someone is suicidal, at least in theory, or at least think about it sometimes, that would be a very bad mix. So I think we should pay attention to drinking, because by any standard, some of the numbers we were getting were quite high. Well, let's keep going. Like I said, it relates to depression. It was actually correlated also highly with PTSD. The more people were working overtime, the more likely they would engage in hazardous levels of drinking. Being male is a predictor, working at a mine site, and also the consumption of alcohol is related to the consumption of drugs. Oh, by the way, just because this is such a sensitive issue, we're going to assume that these are conservative estimates. I suspect the numbers are probably much higher. Now, if you only had one instrument, you only had one instrument to give to your workforce, the one that I might select is the personal burnout score, because that score seems really related to depression, the anxiety scores, the PTSD, the sleep, and the fatigue. So the work we've done had participants responding to a survey that lasted about an hour, and they did it. And our participation rate was very high. It was higher, we like to brag sometimes, than most elections in Canada. Let's keep going. So that's a snapshot, but science is often about trying to predict things, try to understand what might happen next. So we measure a bunch of factors and we try to control a bunch of other factors to be able to look at potential outcomes. If what you're interested in is mental health, one of the things that you should think about is people who report a poor work situation, where they're experiencing frequent and high levels of work stress, where there's frequent work-related muscle strain. So we can anticipate mental health to be affected by those three things stronger than other factors. Let's look at the next slide. Let's look at depression and PTSD. So in the top left quadrant, these are the factors that are predicting depression in large samples of mining workers. When people say that their sleep is poor, when their stress is high, when they feel burnt out and have symptoms of it, when they're complaining of fatigue, and this final variable, which also strongly predicted depression, was when and how and for how long they got to choose their vacations. Being able to choose your vacation remarkably had a fairly strong effect on their symptoms of depression. And then let's look at the factors that predict against it. In other words, that serve as a bit of an antidote to depression. And one of those big things is job satisfaction. So how satisfied you are with the work that you do. But the other thing that's absolutely so important is relationship satisfaction. So your parents were right. You really do need to marry well or have a good relationship if mental health is a priority for you. What about PTSD? Well, these things also predict PTSD, your poor sleep, your perceived stress, feeling burnt out again. But what emerges now from our equations is being a victim of discrimination, such that if you are a victim of discrimination in any form, the likelihood of a PTSD diagnosis actually increases. Let's keep going. Anxiety, fatigue, and sleep quality are also things that we can predict. I want to just highlight a few things here. In terms of sleep quality, one of the best predictors is how long it took you to commute to work, how long your job required you to be sitting, and how balanced your life was at home versus work. So that's going to affect sleep quality significantly. Hadn't expected the commute time to be such a strong predictor, but it really, really is in terms of sleep at least. And of course, sleep quality is associated with fatigue, which is associated with the other things we've talked about. Next slide. Okay, let's keep predicting things. Let's say you wanted to know who's likely to miss work for mental health related absence. Well, here's what you might want to consider. You might want to consider if the person is working more than 8-hour shifts, if their commute to work is more than an hour, they tell you they're being discriminated at work, they're engaging in hazardous types of duties, if they're directly working underground, and then the other things that we're familiar with on the left, mental health treatment, diagnosis, feeling anxious, and feeling burnt out. Those will predict mental health related absences. Next slide. What are the factors that decrease the likelihood of a mental health related absence? Well, having a good work-life balance, that shouldn't surprise you. Having some say on your vacation. Being a contractor casual worker actually predicted against absenteeism. And maybe that won't necessarily be surprising for some of us. Years in mining and how engaged they are in the work that they do. Next. Now, I share all this with you because there's a really large problem occurring here. Of course, no one will deny the amount of human suffering that goes with absenteeism and illness and injury and a return to work. The financial problem, though, is that, and I was actually a bit struck by these numbers, about 8 to 10% of all people are absent from work today, regardless of industry in Canada. And what that means on a higher order level is that 10% of all our tax dollars actually, or the cost to society, 10% is attributable to that absence. Next slide. It took me a while to figure these numbers out, but finally we have some numbers I think we can be confident in. A mental health claim for short-term disability leave will cost most organizations about $17,000 per claim. For a physical health related issue, it's about $9,000. Now, picture now maybe a small to medium size business. That's about $51K a year for mental health absences and about $63K a year for physical related absences because there's more of those. Mental health absenteeism is reported at about 30%. But for an organization of that size, that represents about $114,000. Let's keep going. Why this is really important for organizations and for policymakers is that there's undeniable strain that is created on people's health and financial health. So one of the questions that I get most often in my practice when someone is off work, of course, is what is the likelihood they're going to go back to work? And when will they return to work? Next slide. This is an empirical question. In other words, we can predict things. And the first 10 minutes of this talk, I was talking to you about prediction. We can predict now with much, much better accuracy than just clinical opinion. We can predict who is likely to get back to work, and also within certain margins of error, when that is likely to occur. So I can't tell you how long I've been working on this. This is like a 15 to 20-year endeavor. And there actually should be a word on this whole slide called Yahoo or Eureka or something, because I think we've got it now. I really do think we have it. So next slide. The solution, we think, is to find out what are the facilitators and barriers of a return to work. We've done that. We have the algorithms now that will predict a likelihood of a return to work, that can track progress over time to maximize successful return to work outcomes. And what is more, on the next slide, is we can do it in a way that collects relevant information, that prioritizes needs, that identifies the interventions required, that will estimate outcomes, and now that scientifically offers some evidence of outcome. So this in our lab has become a thing of beauty, which we're looking forward to pilot. These are the variables that we strongly feel will allow us to make estimates on a return to work, not just in terms of likelihood, but also in terms of timing. As a side note, I used to be a prison psychologist, and our task in penitentiaries, where I was, is to predict who's going to commit an offense after they're granted parole. So a lot of my job back then was to give a scientific estimate, because if I just used my intuition, if I used my gut, if I used anecdotes and my recent experience, science has shown that our predictions will be pretty bad. In fact, psychologists' predictions in terms of recidivism, that is doing another offense after you've been incarcerated, if you don't use any instruments, your prediction actually are going to be pretty far off and probably no better than the general public. In other words, if you don't have an instrument that quantifies some things, your prediction is really going to suck. Suck's a very clinical word, by the way. Let's go to the next one. We think that in 30 minutes with the right input, we can generate predictions, the risks in the areas requiring treatment for workers. The next slide. For case managers, that means a lot, because they can understand just the needs of their caseloads. It allows them to more efficiently collect information on people who need help. It allows case managers to monitor things better. It uses far less time and resources, and therefore less claims and administrative costs. And in fact, let's just pretend that this instrument very conservatively decreased costs by about 10%. Let's take a look at that on a larger scale. on the next slide. Well, let's use WSIB as an example. I mean, their own documents will show that the cost of claims per year is about $1 billion. Let's say that we case managed people just a little bit better. Say we changed outcomes by just 10%. The effect that has on this level of scale is about $100 million. And that's just WSIB. Let's keep going. For healthcare providers, having a tool like this is really helpful too, because they're going to feel more confident in their predictions. They'll be less liable to feel pressure to give, a clinical opinion that may not be, or that may be biased. There's less professional risk, and there's reduced duplication of all these forms that we end up doing day in and day out. Next slide. And let's go to the next as well. So again, a much smaller scale, but I think still relevant, an organization of about 1,000 employees. If we only did 10% better, the absenteeism costs for you would likely decrease by about $110,000. Next. Let's go to the next as well. I just want to leave you on where we're going next. We do know the costs of absenteeism fairly well now. The one thing we're going to start looking at is presenteeism. There's some evidence out there now that presenteeism, that is showing up to work when maybe you shouldn't because you're not well or fully recovered or stressed or fatigued, is actually more costly than being absent altogether. And in Canada, we think that that's about 2 out of every 9 workers. So we want to understand how to improve those numbers and what factors are mitigating and causing these issues of presenteeism. Next slide. I'll wrap it up here. Maybe on the next one. Oh, and one more? Well, there you go. This is where the presentation ends. I hope that it has been helpful. I look forward to speaking with you with questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lariviere. I know I'm still taking in all the data that was shared. It was really great to be able to see that. And I think for both Mario and Priya, they were maybe being asked some of those data questions. And I think between both presentations, that was made a lot more clear. I do know there's one question in the Q&A that would be for you to answer. So maybe we can start with that one. But while Dr. Lariviere is answering it, please feel free to use the Q&A. This is your chance to really ask those clarifying questions and get the support that you need for your workplace. So Dr. Lariviere, your question is about what is included in victim discrimination as it relates to PTSD.
Mm-hmm. So this relates a lot to civility in the workplace. So people who feel discriminated against can be on the basis of the obvious things like, gender and age and socioeconomic status. So it was kind of a large group of all those types of factors: harassment, bullying, incivility in the workplace. Those types of things, and experiencing it, you're more likely to score higher on PTSD scores.
Okay. Great. I hope that answers the question. I know it provides the answer for me, so that's good. I do see Lisa, who works with Workplace Safety North, is advocating to bring you to the conference, so future conference. So I think anyone on the call today can definitely pick up the fact that this information is really great for everyone in the mining industry specifically. But again, just what it sort of speaks for Ontario alone, and some of them across Canada, is very, very good. So I don't know, a part of me thought that if there weren't many questions coming up in the Q&A, I thought that perhaps maybe Mario or Priya would have a question for Dr. Lariviere and vice versa. going through. So I'll give you guys a minute to think
Elisha,
about that.
There's a question in the chat, and I think there's an.
Okay, thank you, Priya.
No problem.
So maybe while those go on, you can think about maybe what you want to ask for each other. But okay, so the question in the chat says, thank you, Dr. Lariviere. Do you recommend the HADS questionnaire for evaluating depression and anxiety at workplaces?
Thanks, Paris, too. I didn't know you were going to be here today, but I'm happy you are. I can't say that I'm familiar enough with the instrument to evaluate it, but I'd be happy to talk to you on the side and look at it and see its suitability for this.
Okay. I also see a question from Nadine, and it says, it's interesting that studies are only for workers. I'm noticing that middle leadership is also starting to show burnout. Any comments? And I imagine both, all three of you could probably include something here, but since you're off mute, Dr. Lariviere, let's start with you.
Okay. The research we've done has included people from all professions in the mining industry. So that would be accountants, HR experts. It would also include geologists and engineers and all middle managers in between. So yes, we do have that data. And I agree with you. That's a tough place to be quite often in middle management, where you are given sometimes responsibility without authority.
Thank you for that. And then Mario, you're off mute as well. Would you like to comment to that one?
Yeah, and I think that goes to again, a disconnect between sometimes corporate management and then the workforce. And I think initiatives that are brought through for, how could I say this, from corporate need to be communicated properly down towards management and the middle piece of the company, the middle individuals who facilitate these sort of initiatives. And it sometimes falls really hard on the middle class to say, well, you know, we've tried this or we've tried that, and we're just seeing so many people off work, or we're dealing with a lot of absenteeism, and it falls on them to have the extra load of work and need to cover for a lot of the absenteeism. But again, I think it's communication. And that's what we've noticed. It's clear communication issues across the site from the different sectors of authority. And of course, there's going to be burnout. There's a workforce to be productive, and a lot of it's bonus driven. And if it's not performing, it's the middle who takes the hit, and then from there, the upper management. So it's a structure, and I think there needs to be systems put in place and processes put in place. I'm not sure if Priya wants to add something to that.
Well, I think it's a great question and a great comment. I think that a lot of the times when we're playing catch up, it's a very reactive approach. So it does fall a lot on that middle management, because something needs to be done, and it needs to be done very quickly, and it needs to be done yesterday. And then it becomes this state of urgency, and it's a stress, versus if we're dealing more on that prevention, planned out model of how the next year is going to go, and we're going to be tackling these types of topics. We're going to look at what the next year is going to be like. And so in that case, you're not playing catch up, and you're not having to implement things on the fly. And also the programming should be done across the site. So it shouldn't just be for one department or one area. Of course, they're going to say, well, this is productivity. This is where, we're getting more units out. And they're going to want to put more emphasis on a certain area when it comes to that department. But again, looking at all the different departments, from their needs, their challenges, their struggles, and being able to cater accordingly, I think is really important. So that proactive versus reactive model is definitely a big piece. And someone had even mentioned in the other chat, they did a link for a Deloitte article that, again, I believe is just related to corporate in general, like lots of companies. So I do think that there is some good research out there, but we cannot forget about the middle management as well. Definitely.
Yeah, thank you for those responses. And I find when we get into talking mental health with our employers through training, we sort of referenced this fact that it's evolving so rapidly, with research coming out and things shifting. And there's a question in here too, just related to younger generations and women entering the work, these industries. What does that look like? So the question, I'll link it to that now. So Lisa has a question here about, do you see some of these statistics shifting over time due to the increase of women, younger generations entering mining, other resource sectors? Women and our young people in the past experience in mining tend to be more forthcoming to the employer and symptoms and requesting their needs for work-life balance. Dr. Lariviere, you want to start with that one?
Lisa, I think you've nailed it. I'd love to talk to you more. I 100% agree with you. You will see these statistics shift over time. And there is this changing workforce that is going to change the data. And I think we should pay attention to how that data changes. I don't think we should rely on my numbers for the next 20 years at all. Now, it is true that I find, well, in my observation at least, younger people tend to be better at advocating for work-life balance. And that seems to be the case, without trying to stereotype, among women respondents as well. What I think we could do better, because now we've sensitized, I think, the population to mental health needs. We've taken away at least some of the stigma to be able to speak to it. I think what we need to do better next is equip people with skills of resilience, to be able to handle setbacks in a way that is healthy and that keeps you at work, as opposed to, well, I'm just going to quiet quit, which seems to be a popular thing to do nowadays, at least until the next, I think, recession. Anyways, what do you guys think, Priya and Mario?
Well, I did really enjoy your response. I think that it's hard to not stereotype in a lot of instances. There's definitely things that we do hear from the sites that come out when looking at more of that traditional approach, where someone in kind of an older generation miner or industry worker will have a different perspective than someone coming in with from a younger generation. I think sometimes it leads to a bit of disconnect within a site because there's various philosophies of thinking. I do think it's going to shift the data. I think it's going to shift the types of services or supports that will be needed. I do think resilience is a big piece as well. I don't know the exact solution or protocol for how that will work. But I do think it's a very important point to look at, Lisa, in how we shape programming and what type of services are available. Just a small example is one site visit that we did. I had a woman and this was a mining site, a woman that was pregnant. And she said, there are no resources for me here, and there's no accommodations really that are being put in place unless I advocate for it. And I thought that was really interesting. I think there's going to be a lot of things coming up at the forefront of having more women within the workforce or the younger generation. I think there could be more demands being put out there. And I think we need to adapt because retention turnover is a big piece. And also, diversity and inclusion. So I think we need to think very strongly about these aspects and use them in our planning as well.
Thank you, Priya. We pretty much have a minute and a half left, and I wanted to just give a small moment to Amanda's question, but also with the reminder that Gabby and Paige will be sending out an email to everyone with references and resources that are going to be shared by each of you. But she does have a question here about specific documents that could be presented to management for small wins within a company. So I thought maybe Dr. Lariviere, you could share one quickly, like 22 seconds is what you get. And then maybe Mario or Priya, one of you from your end.
Off the top of my head, I can't think of a specific document, but I would say, because every management is different in different places, they each have their own culture. I think you need to know your audience before you propose anything to them. And you need to really speak their language. And if you need me to chat them up for 10 minutes, that's all I'll need.
Thank you very much. 22 seconds. You nailed that. Maybe Mario, you're off mute, so go ahead.
Yeah, no, same. I believe there is no specific, like I said, no one size fits all. Every site is different. Every company is different. The culture is different. We believe that strongly in that assessment piece. So making sure that if you're going to have small wins, and small wins means that, you're tackling a small component of a bigger picture to start off with until you really nail it down. And that comes with knowing your workforce, knowing what issues are underlining and what are the root causes behind all of this stuff. And that takes time and effort from not just one person, a wellness coordinator. It's in management, it's leadership, it's the workforce, it's the people that are proactive on taking grabbing the bull by the horns and really trying to nail down what small one win will lead to 3 to 4 different wins. So again, we're here to help. So we'll share our details, and if we can help in any way to just give some education or give some feedback to you specifically, Amanda, or anybody else on this in this chat right now, feel free to reach out. We're more than happy to help.
Okay, amazing. It is 1:01. I want to respect everyone's time. I told you I'd get you out of here by 1. Thank you so much to each of you for speaking today and sharing your knowledge and research experience, all of those wonderful things. So, if everybody could give a round of applause as if we were like in a, conference, that would be fantastic. But thank you very much. And I look forward to working with each of you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a nice day.